Well, for more on this story, I'm joined by our Environment Editor, Valérie Dekimpe. Hello to you, Valerie. We're still waiting for these closing remarks to finish so we can hear that press conference. At that press conference, we're going to have a roadmap. What do you think might actually be on that?
Right. So that roadmap is going to be the very first step forward that will pave the way for broader reform. We've been talking about over the last 2 days how the objective of this summit is really reforming the global financial system in order to really help developing countries cope with the effects of climate change. Now, that roadmap will be kind of the conclusion of what countries and financial institutions have been discussing over the last 2 days and some of the commitments that have been announced. It will come in the form of a 6-page proposal, we hear, and those proposals will need to be delivered by September 2024. And all the things mentioned in that roadmap countries and financial institutions will have to go back home, do their homework, prepare those proposals ahead of a G20 summit, a World Bank and IMF meetings in October, and COP28, of course. Now, what exactly will be in that roadmap? Well, we know that most likely there will be a mention of debt suspension, a pause in debt payments for developing nations, vulnerable countries hit by natural disasters. Really, the big news of the last 2 days is that the World Bank has agreed on this idea, but what we know is that it will only apply to new loan agreements rather than existing loans. So that is something that has already been achieved in a way over the last 2 days. There's also going to be mention of IMF special drawing rights. What exactly are we talking about? It's a special IMF fund of reserve assets that was actually created during COVID, mostly for rich countries to use. Now the idea is to rechannel the money that was not used by wealthy nations to developing countries for climate finance. So that will most likely be in the roadmap. In terms of taxes, that remains to be seen. It is unclear what mention there will be in terms of taxes, because that has been the most controversial item, I would say, of the summit. We've been hearing about a new global tax on financial transactions, fossil fuels, aviation, and there's also potentially a proposal for a levy on shipping industry emissions, and that again ahead of an important UN meeting. Taxes will be a difficult point because not all countries agree on what exactly they should look like. So the EU, for example, wants more countries to use emissions trading, so carbon trading, instead of having like a global tax. So if the EU is not really going for it, potentially we might not see it in this final roadmap. Again, very important, the U.S. is not also really much on board with the idea of having taxes. We heard from John Kerry, the U.S. Special Climate Envoy to U.S. President Joe Biden, saying that the White House did not have a position on potential taxes on shipping, aviation, or fossil fuels. And it does seem that the U.S. is also more in support of pricing carbon instead of actually having a tax. So remains to be seen if a mention of a tax of some sort will be included in that roadmap.
Valerie, cynics might say that at international summits like this, it's big on talk but little on action. What needs to happen for the participants to live up to the expectations?
Well, I think that the problem that we've been seeing with climate finance over the last decade and more is the fact that climate finance, the money is not reaching the countries that need it the most. And, we've been saying that developing nations, vulnerable nations are the ones suffering from the effects of climate change, but they are not the ones receiving all the aid that they actually need. And, everything that I've been talking about, we have $100 billion from the IMF as special drawing rights, potential debt pauses from the World Bank. It sounds like a lot of money and it sounds like really concrete action. And it is, don't get me wrong. But at the end of the day, if you look at estimates, the data that shows you that every single year developing countries will need $2 trillion by 2030 in order to cope with the effects of climate change, is just anything that's been mentioned here is just a tiny portion of what they will need over the next few years. And so we need to keep that in mind, that this is progress, but it's still very far off from where we need to be.
All right, Valerie, thank you very much. Valérie Dekimpe, our 24's Environment Editor.